Can you beat Terraria starting in Master Hard Mode? This was a seemingly simple challenge I'd set upon myself a couple weeks ago, but ever since it's spiraled into something much more painful than I'd originally expected, with pretty much every enemy one-shotting me, the majority of the world completely covered in crimson or the hollowed, and an unreasonable amount of death slowly deteriorating my sanity. Despite all of this difficulty though, my goal for the video was to beat all 3 of the mechanical bosses, as by this point I'd be pretty much ready for the rest of Hard Mode. I put a ton of effort into this video, so hopefully you'll enjoy, and without further ado, let's get right into it. As soon as I spawned into my world, I immediately began chopping down any tree in sight, proudly taking part in mass deforestation for my own personal gain. While in the middle of all this tree cutting though, a green slime came flying down from the sky and promptly killed me with a single hit, which once again reminded me this wasn't exactly going to be easy. Anyways, after respawning, I finished chopping down a few more trees, crafted up some basic equipment and began exploring the surface, looking to figure out where everything was and grab myself some more gear. I headed to the left to find a crimson desert, then made my way to the right where I came across a cave, making sure to loot up any gear I could find, including a ton of lead, some money, and a lucky horseshoe which I found in a chest. After a few dozen deaths down here however, I was sent back to the surface where the sky had begun to dim. And since my previous incident with the green slime, I didn't exactly want to take my chances out in the open, so I decided to build myself a shelter, fabricating a true masterpiece of architecture even the greats would marvel at. I worked on this through the night, but after waking up on the next day, it was time to get down to business and finally look for a weapon. As to be perfectly honest, by this point my copper shortsword was probably damaging my mental state more than anything I was attacking, and I was in desperate need of an upgrade. So I was off to find whatever weapons I could find anywhere I could, traversing the hollow, jungle, and all the way back to the caves where I could go mining. More specifically, I was in search of the best hard mode weapon I could find with the little gear that I had. The only problem was that pretty much all of the hard mode weapons require some level of preparation or gear to obtain, like the spider staff, which requires you to kill a ton of black recluses, the cutlass you can get from a pirate invasion, or any of the titanium gear, which you need to mine a ton of ore for. I was looking for something I could acquire with the lackluster gear I already had, so I spent hours upon hours hunting through the caverns, heading to the edge of the world and opening an alarming amount of wiki tabs. But despite this, I still had pretty much no clue what I was going to do, up until eventually I had an idea: the Amarok. This was a relatively rare hard mode yo-yo that you'd have a 1 in 300 chance to get whenever you killed an enemy in a snow biome. And while on first glance this seemed like a high number, it didn't actually matter what you killed, as I could beat any enemy in a snow biome, including pre-hard mode ones. And on top of this, I could just automate the whole process with some lava. So I got to work building a pretty basic arena, trying to avoid the swarm of pixies getting in my way until it was finally done. I lit up a water candle to boost enemy spawn rates and began to wait, and wait, and wait. A few days went by of wind, snow, and even a failed encounter with deer clops, but eventually I was able to get the Amarok, along with a ton of gold and some other useful items. This felt fantastic, as at last I finally had a decent source of damage and could actually fight back against enemies. So I wasted no time and immediately headed home to test it out on whatever enemies I could, fighting off a goblin army with relative ease and making quick work of a few previously untouchable enemies. However, the problem of defense still remained, as despite this newly acquired damage, I was still wearing cactus armor, protecting me with a monumental 3 defense, or in other words, pretty much nothing at all. It was obvious I needed an upgrade to my armor, and for the next few days I was searching for ideas, looking around the world, heading into the caves, and eventually coming across a spider biome, giving me the idea of spider armor. To craft spider armor, I was going to need 36 fangs, which I could get from black recluses, and while this was technically meant for the summoner class, it was the best option I had. So I ran around back and forth from the spider nest trying to gather up as many fangs as I could, pummeling enemies with my yo-yo until eventually I jotted more than enough fangs to craft the spider armor, along with a couple extra which I decided I may as well use for the spider staff, providing me with an army of spiders to defend myself. I also came across this skeleton merchant along the way, something that was super convenient, as he sold me a yo-yo glove which pretty much lets me throw 2 yo-yos at once, as well as a counterbalance which gives me another extra projectile. As if this wasn't enough though, I also came across the goblin tinkerer tied up in a cave, who sold me the tinkerer's workshop, letting me combine these 2 items to some string to make a yo-yo bag, probably one of the best accessories I could have at this point. While I was at it, I also grabbed some rocket boots from the goblin and combined all of my accessories, which was a nice bonus. After all this preparation, I wanted to see how I'd go in combat, so I summoned up the Eye of Cthulhu, who as expected didn't exactly have much of a chance, providing me with a warding shield of Cthulhu, which is going to be super helpful for dodging attacks. By this point though, I still needed an upgrade to my mobility though, as out of all my equipment this was by far the worst part, since all I had was a pair of rocket boots which just weren't going to cut it for the mechanical bosses. I needed wings and I needed them soon, but first I had to kill the wall of flesh so I could break crimson altars, unlock hard mode ores, and craft a mythal anvil which I needed to make them. So I headed down my elevator, made my way to hell, and began building a bridge across the lava, as while I might have had some decent gear, the master mode wall of flesh still had a lot of health and I needed to be prepared. I made my way forward, laying down ash blocks, making sure to mine some holes down every now and then to drain the lava slime's lava. After that though, I was ready for the fight, and after finding a conveniently timed guide voodoo demon, I chucked the doll into lava and began combat. With the short range of my yo yo-yo, this wasn't the easiest fight, but with the help of my spiders, I was able to make do. And after reaching the very end of my hell bridge, I was just able to finish him off. Apart from the demon heart, which gave me an extra accessory slot, I didn't receive any particularly useful drops, but that didn't matter, as my main focus now was destroying some crimson altars with my pwn hammer. I got really lucky with my altar spawns and destroyed pretty much all of them to receive cobalt, mithril, and titanium, which isn't great, but it doesn't really matter, as I'm only looking to craft the mithril anvil. After that, I grabbed up a molten pickaxe, drank up a spelunker potion, and began searching for ores, getting enough cobalt to craft a drill, then promptly collecting all of the mithril I needed for an anvil. After that, all I had left was to kill a wyvern for some souls of sight, and at last I was good to go, using an ice feather I got while farming in the snow biome to make some frost wings, one of the better pairs of wings in early hard mode. This was the final main upgrade I needed to complete my preparation, but despite this I still needed a little extra damage from the mechanical bosses, as this was master mode and I needed any advantage I could get. The first of these advantages being the bewitching table, which you can find in the dungeon and gives you an extra summon whenever you use it. So I made my way to the dungeon, built up a decent enough arena, quickly dealt with Skeletron, and then descended downwards, eventually finding my desired bewitching table along with a unicorn statue, which is actually going to be more useful than you might think. In Terraria, whenever you use a statue to summon an enemy, most of the time you'll still be able to receive the enemy's normal drops, just with some drastically lowered chance. In the case of the unicorn, by around 20 times. The item in particular I'm looking to get is the blessed apple, a 1 in 800 drop from the statue which summons a unicorn mount. Luckily enough, all of this statue work can be done in a surprisingly short amount of time using some automation. All I need is a 1/4 of a second timer from the mechanic I just found, along with some spiders in a box to kill all the unicorns. So I spent some time farming up until eventually the unicorn mount was in my hands and I'd gotten another huge boost to my mobility. Next up, I wanted the golden shower, a spell that I can keep applying between attacks and reduces an enemy's defense by 15. To craft this, I needed a spell tome, souls of night, and some ichor, the latter of which I was missing. So I rode my unicorn to the crimson and began farming ichor stickers, up until I had everything I needed and could craft the golden shower at a bookcase. The next thing I wanted to do was gather up a ton of potions. So I built myself a little garden beside my house with planters to grow all the herbs I was going to need, along with a few extra. More specifically, I wanted to make swiftness potions, regeneration potions, and iron skin potions, as my defense still needed a little bit of a boost. I spent the day setting all of this up, and after that got to building my arena beside my base, excavating the mountain that was in the way, laying down a ton of platforms, chucking in some campfires, and adding anything else I needed, up until eventually I was finally ready for combat. So after gathering up the summoning item for each of the mechanical bosses, I waited until night and began fighting. I spent a good few nights trying to defeat the destroyer, each of these attempts losing to me running out of time or getting swarmed by all the probes, up until one night where it was raining, a blood moon, and I'd forgotten all of my potions, leaving me to eat mushrooms. But somehow I managed to survive, and halfway through was lucky enough to get a Nimbus rod, letting me kill him just before the sun rose. Next up was Skeletron Prime, who once again posed a pretty significant challenge, but after some time I was able to tear off each of his limbs and strike him to death with my yo-yo. And finally I was ready for my fight with the twins, my last mechanical boss and a relatively difficult fight on master mode. I summoned up all my spiders, took some hits with my yo-yo, and after some time had finally done it. I put a ton of effort into this video, so hopefully you enjoyed, and if you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe. Goodbye.